famous part of London. It's called Change Alley, and it's very quiet. Looks like kind of the back end of office blocks or shops, because that's what it is. This is not some famous landmark in London, but it's very significant. So Change Alley was the headquarters, the beginning of the East India Company, which was founded under Queen Elizabeth in 1600. And the beginning was just a few little trading posts around the coast of India. But those trading posts needed a bit of security, so they had a bit of an army some soldiers to do that. But in the end, as the company got bigger, and as British people drank more tea, for example, the army needed to get bigger. So there was a famous battle in with Clive of India, Battle of Plassey, and effectively there was a key moment where this trading company effectively took control of India. So now you need to start thinking about in terms of like Google with guns, or Amazon with ammunition, or Murdoch with militia. So now we have a whole country where the government principles of those countries, from the urban to the rural, from long-term to short-term, from materials to cereals, it was all about profit. So the algorithm, the decision-making for the whole of this area, India, came under the operating system of what we call capitalism. So that's really an important moment, because this was not just happening in India, this was happening globally. Around the world, all of these operate. If you look at the headlines in terms of military battles and things like that, in a way that's a sort of distraction. The real key thing is that the entire operating system of people's decision-making was coming under the imperatives of growth and profit. And in a way, all of that decision-making apparatus came here to London and to the banking things. In fact, over my shoulder, we have the Bank of England, we have the Royal Exchange, and this was like a centralization or globalization of the world economy. So we're now just a few steps away from Change Alley, and behind me you can see the growth of these amazing skyscrapers. You can see the amazing growth which happened under the British Empire. And if we just zoom in on one date now, it's quite significant. In 1876, a famine hit India, and an estimated between 6 and 10 million people died in its bony grip. Now, if you're looking at the details of that, at the same time that the famine was happening under British governance, the British exported out of India 320 tons of wheat. Now, you can look at all the different dimensions there, but there was no question that the capitalism and growth in the 19th century certainly didn't work out very well for the Indian people. Global injustices to the side for a minute, but let's just ask more questions about capitalism. So, under this operating system, there are certain things which are, of course, a priority, and that's things like growth and things like profit. And if you look, if I just turn around, and there's the Bank of England, nicely subtitled there, Bank. We have to ask questions about the operating system under which all of this space is organized. All these buildings, all the transport system, everything, it all falls under this operating system of capitalism. And if I just noticed on my right here, there's a bulldozer. So they're doing infrastructure. Now, there's certain things that don't get considered in the growth model of capitalism, and certain things get bulldozed. And for sure, the environment is not one of those things. So whilst we can applaud capitalism for its tremendous economic growth and raising of average income and so on, there are holes in it, and there are certain problems which need to come under scrutiny. We can't just accept economic growth without asking some basic questions. it reminds me of the quote about democracy, and that, I think we all would agree that democracy is a good idea. But E.M. Forster said that we should applaud democracy twice, but not 3 times. And the reason for holding back on the third clap for democracy was that it itself has got problems. So it doesn't do everything. And if you look at all of the resource extractions, all of the carbon emissions which have happened in the last century, they've all happened primarily under democratic and capitalist governance. So certain things don't get included in the thinking and the operating system of either democracy or capitalism. Not to say that we have to throw the whole thing out, but we have to ask questions of it, and we can't hold it as some kind of dogma which is not scrutinized. So the Green Competence Framework, when it asks or invites us to do systems thinking, well, the 2 major operating systems which everything is held under is now, as you see symbolized here, capitalism and the imperative of growth, and also under the system of democracy. So this is the back end of the Bank of England, and in a way that's the best place to be, to look at things from the other side. And if we narrow in, let's pretend that capitalism is equally good for everybody, but zoom in on one of the key meters of economic growth, and that is GDP. So we've had GDP as a measure of economic activity since the 1930s. It was invented by an economist, American, called Simon Kuznets. And when he came up with it in response to the Wall Street crash, just to try and get a handle on what was going on, just try and get some key numbers and some key indicators, Kuznets himself said it was a terrible way of measuring economic activity. There's all kinds of things that are not included. But when we look at the news, and when we look at political decision making, and when we look at everything, it is still, oddly, bizarrely perhaps, the central principle of decision making. So we have a very narrow GDP, a very narrow indicator of what it means to be growing and what growth actually means. And of course, as you can see around me, there's hardly any green trees here. This is an entirely urban space. And it's easy to forget in a place like this that all of this activity, all of this building is founded on an environment, that you have to have an environment which can sustain this. And it's easy to forget when we're measuring economic progress. It's easy to blank out key fundamental environmental indicators or parameters. And as you know from the first module, we are currently crashing through those planetary boundaries. So I'd like you now just to watch a video about people chasing cheese. I would have liked to have gone up the steps of this exchange here. This is a really posh place where you can buy all kinds of nice watches and handbags. But it's closed on a Sunday, and therefore we can't go in. But if we were to walk around a shopping area, you would see people, in a way, kind of happily going about developing the GDP of their country, but without any recognition, because you don't have to, of the planetary boundaries. So when you watch this video that's coming up, you'll see inside the video there are British people, but then they're not in an urban space, they're in a field, and they're chasing cheese. And as you see them chasing cheese, I'd like you to think about the fact that although, I'm English, I like cheese, but would I risk everything in order to get a roll of cheese? I mean, how much do we value cheese? So when you watch the video, just think of the cheese as a giant metaphor for GDP, and the fact that we have an entire global economy, not just British people, but an entire global economy which is orientated, which is doing everything it can for economic growth. And without asking some basic questions about what kind of growth and whether that growth is sustainable.
Well, a police inspector came to visit us several months ago. They were concerned whether we were aware of the implications of supplying cheese to the cheese roll. If we knowingly supplied cheese for the cheese roll, we may be held liable for any claims resulting from injuries.
I'm used to defending it, but a bit more pressure on this year.
Indeed, the word growth, so I just pause here before I leave, the word growth is not given any scrutiny. Politicians are allowed to say, yes, we are the party for economic growth, growth. It's put out there as if it's the only measure of success. But growth itself is not always good. If you think about growth in terms of, mold in your cellar, or the growth of cancerous cells that have gone into overdrive mode, that kind of growth is not good. So, of course, you have to be very careful here, because as soon as you start to pick apart a concept, there's all kinds of qualifications that have to be made. But the simple, brutal, blunt fact is that we are currently going through planetary boundaries, and you cannot do that. The whole system will crash. So you therefore have to ask questions, careful questions, about that operating system which is in control, and not. We will have to rethink what we mean by growth, which can be a great thing. There's all kinds of things that can grow, we're very happy about, but it has no resource extraction implication, or it has a smaller resource extraction implication and the smaller consequences for emissions.